October 24th, 1944. The waters off Formosa churned black under a moonless sky as Commander Richard O'Kane pressed his eye against the periscope of USS Tang, watching a Japanese convoy slice through the darkness. In the cramped control room, 28 feet below the surface, sweat dripped from the faces of 87 men who had become legends without knowing it. They had already destroyed more enemy vessels than a nigh submarine crew in American naval history, yet this night would write their final, terrible chapter. O'Kane's fingers tightened on the periscope handles as he counted the silhouettes. 11 ships, heavily laden with troops and supplies desperately needed for Japan's crumbling Pacific defenses. His crew had perfected the deadly dance of submarine warfare through 9 months of relentless hunting, and tonight promised to be their greatest triumph. The Tang had slipped out of Pearl Harbor on her 5th war patrol back in late September, carrying a reputation that made her the most feared predator in the Pacific. Japanese merchant captains whispered about the ghost submarine that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating accuracy, and vanished before escorts could respond. According to declassified U.S. Navy records examined by military historians at the Naval History and Heritage Command, what made Tang extant? Ordinary wasn't just her kill count, it was the systematic precision with which O'Kane and his crew hunted. While other submarines might celebrate sinking 1 or 2 ships per patrol, Tang averaged nearly 7 vessels destroyed every time she left port. The submarine's war diary, preserved in the National Archives, reveals a commander who combined aggressive tactics with mathematical calculation, turning submarine warfare into a lethal science. O'Kane had inherited command of Tang in October 1943 at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California, bringing with him a combat philosophy forged under the legendary Dudley "Mush" Morton aboard USS Wahoo. Morton had taught him that submarines should hunt on the surface whenever possible, using their superior speed and low profile to close on targets or diving for the kill. But O'Kane refined this approach, developing night surface attack techniques that turned Tang into a nearly invisible assassin. His crew trained relentlessly, practicing torpedo calculations until they could compute firing solutions faster than the mechanical torpedo data computer mounted in the conning tower. Torpedo man's mate Floyd Caverly could load tubes in complete darkness, while electricians maintained the complex maze of batteries and motors that kept them alive beneath the waves. The statistics told a story that Japanese naval intelligence struggled to believe. From Tang's first patrol in January 1944 through early October of the same year, she had sent 31 confirmed vessels to the bottom, tankers carrying aviation fuel, cargo ships hauling raw materials OOP transports packed with soldiers. Each sinking represented not just a tactical victory, but a strategic blow to Japan's ability to sustain its far-flung empire. The submarine had operated from the Yellow Sea to the Caroline Islands, from the approaches to Tokyo Bay to the shipping lanes off Formosa. O'Kane's patrol reports, written in terse military prose, barely concealed the intensity of the warfare. Depth charge attacks that rattled teeth and loosened pipes, desperate dives to crush depth, moments when detection seemed certain and death inevitable. Yet Tang always escaped, always returned to hunt again, building a record that would stand unmatched in American submarine warfare history. Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane stood just 5 feet 9 inches tall, with penetrating blue eyes that missed nothing and a mind that processed tactical situations with computer-like speed. Born in Dover, New Hampshire, on February 9, 1910, he had graduated from the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis in 1934, finishing in the top quarter of his class. His path to submarine command had been conventional, until he reported aboard Wahoo in December 1942 as executive officer under Morton. Those trolls with Morton transformed O'Kane from a competent officer into a warrior who understood that submarine warfare demanded audacity tempered by ice-cold calculation. When he assumed command of the newly commissioned Tang in October 1943, he brought a tactical doctrine that would revolutionize American submarine operations in the Pacific theater. Tang herself was a Balao-class submarine, 312 feet of welded steel pressure hull capable of diving to 400 feet. Built at Mare Island, she represented the culmination of American submarine design, faster, deeper diving, and more heavily armed than earlier boats. Her 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, could unleash spreads of Mark 18 electric torpedoes that left no telltale wake. Below decks, 4 massive Fairbanks Morse diesel Eng. Inez generated 5,400 horsepower, driving her at 20 knots on the surface. Submerged, electric motors drew power from 2 massive battery banks, providing quieter but slower underwater propulsion. The crew spaces were cramped beyond civilian imagination. Men slept in bunks stacked 3 high, sharing space with food stores, torpedoes, and the constant smell of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and cooking. Yet this floating steel tube became home to men who would achieve the impossible. Tang's first war patrol, launched in January 1944, set the pattern for everything that followed. O'Kane took his boat into the Caroline Islands, the heavily defended Japanese stronghold where most submarine commanders operated cautiously. Instead, he penetrated the anchorage, at Truk Lagoon itself, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, navigating through minefields and patrol boats to attack ships at anchor. On the night of February 17th, Tang surfaced inside the lagoon and fired spreads at 2 large cargo vessels, sinking both before crash diving to escape the chaos of explosions and searchlights. Over 20 days of patrol, Tang destroyed 5 ships, totaling 16,000 tons. Naval commanders at Pearl Harbor studied O'Kane's patrol report with astonishment. Such aggressive tactics violated conventional wisdom about submarine operations in heavily defended waters. The second patrol, from March through April 1944, took Tang into the waters off the Japanese home islands. O'Kane positioned his submarine along the shipping lanes between Japan and the Asian mainland, interdicting the flow of raw material sustaining Japan's war machine. Naval records document how Tang sank 2 freighters and a tanker before encountering a heavily escorted convoy on April 26th. Standard doctrine called for submarines to attack from maximum range and retreat immediately. O'Kane instead maneuvered Tang to point-blank range, less than 800 yards, before firing a full spread of 6 torpedoes. All 6 found targets, sinking 2 cargo ships and damaging the escorts. The patrol yielded 5 confirmed kills totaling 18,000 tons, earned O'Kane his first Navy Cross, and established Tang's reputation as the most aggressive submarine in the Pacific Fleet. His after-action reports, studied by submarine commanders throughout the war, demonstrated that audacity combined with precise navigation and torpedo fire control could achieve results that seemed impossible by conventional methods. June 19, 1944. Tang departed Midway Atoll bound for the Yellow Sea, that shallow, dangerous body of water separating Korea from China, where few American submarines dared operate. The Yellow Sea presented unique challenges, depths averaging only 30 feet in man. Areas left no room for emergency deep dives, while Japanese anti-submarine patrols operated from bases just hours away. O'Kane studied the intelligence reports showing heavy traffic between Japan and the Asian mainland, recognizing that this dangerous hunting ground offered unprecedented opportunities. His crew had complete confidence in their commander's judgment, though several veteran submariners privately wondered if O'Kane's luck might finally run out in waters that offered no escape routes. The patrol began slowly, with Tang detecting few targets during the first week. O'Kane positioned his submarine along the main shipping lane from Shanghai to Korea, running submerged during daylight hours and surfacing at night to charge batteries and search for convoys. On June 24th, lookouts spotted smoke on the horizon just before dawn. O'Kane kept Tang on the surface, using her superior speed to close on what his identification manuals revealed as a large freighter escorted by 2 patrol craft. Rather than submerge for a traditional periscope attack, O'Kane ran in on the surface, using the pre-dawn darkness for concealment. At 2,500 yards, Tang fired 4 torpedoes, then executed a high-speed turn to present her stern tubes. 2 explosions ripped through the freighter, sending her to the bottom in less than 8 minutes. The escorts never detected Tang's position, and O'Kane disappeared into the morning haze. Over the following 3 weeks, Tang transformed the Yellow Sea into what Japanese naval officers would later describe as a slaughterhouse. O'Kane developed a pattern of operating close to the Chinese and Korean coasts, where merchant ships hugged shallow water thinking themselves safe from submarines. On June 30th, Tang intercepted a 6-ship convoy off the mouth of the Yangtze River. O'Kane executed a textbook approach, firing bow tubes at the 2 largest cargo vessels before swinging around to fire stern tubes at a tanker. All 3 ships went down within 15 minutes, while the escorts dropped depth charges on a false contact 2 miles away. The crew's morale soared with each sinking, though the constant operating in shallow water kept everyone's nerves taut as piano wire. The climactic action came on July 4th, when Tang encountered what Japanese records would later reveal was a critical convoy carrying iron ore and industrial equipment from Manchuria to Japan's home islands. 11 ships stretched across the horizon, protected by 4 escorts including a destroyer. Standard submarine doctrine called for a single attack pass against such a heavily defended convoy, hitting 1 or 2 targets before retreating. O'Kane instead spent 6 hours maneuvering Tang into position for multiple attacks. As darkness fell, he brought Tang to the surface and executed a series of attacks that naval tacticians would study for decades. According to historical research by naval historian Clay Blair, whose work, Silent Victory, remains the definitive account of American submarine operations in World War II, O'Kane fired 24 torpedoes over the course of that night, sinking 5 ships and damaging 2 others. Tang twisted between the convoy columns, using the merchant ships themselves as cover from the escorts. Path charges exploded constantly, but always in the wrong places as O'Kane outmaneuvered the defenders. When Tang finally withdrew at dawn, the crew had witnessed what many considered the most aggressive surface attack in submarine warfare history. The 3rd patrol ended with 10 confirmed sinkings totaling 39,000 tons, earning O'Kane his 2nd Navy Cross and Tang her 1st Presidential Unit citation. August 9, 1944. Tang slipped beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor's entrance channel, beginning her 4th war patrol with a crew that had achieved near-mythical status among Pacific submariners. O'Kane's orders directed him to the East China Sea and the approaches to the Japanese home islands, areas where merchant traffic had become increasingly scarce as American submarines decimated Japan's merchant fleet. Naval intelligence estimated that Japan had lost nearly 60% of its pre-war merchant tonnage, creating desperate shortages of food, fuel, and raw materials across the empire. Every ship that remained afloat became precious to Japanese war planners, heavily escorted and routed through waters where air coverage offered some protection from submarine attack. Tang's crew had evolved into a perfectly synchronized fighting machine. In the forward torpedo room, torpedo men could reload tubes in darkness, while the submarine twisted through evasive maneuvers. In the conning tower, O'Kane and his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Frank Springer, computed firing solutions with an accuracy that seemed supernatural. The plotting party below in the control room tracked multiple targets simultaneously, feeding bearing and range information to the torpedo data computer. Even the lookouts had developed an almost 6th sense for detecting distant ships, spotting masts over the horizon before radar could paint targets. Chief motor machinist Jesse Da Silva kept the temperamental diesel engines running despite constant mechanical stress, while Chief electrician William Liebold nursed the battery banks through charge cycles that would have destroyed lesser equipment. The 4th patrol began with a week of frustration as Tang encountered only small, unworthy targets, fishing boats, coastal freighters, vessels too insignificant to waste precious torpedoes on. O'Kane pushed northward toward the main shipping lanes between Shanghai and Japan, operating in waters within range of Japanese air patrols. On August 15th, radar detected a large convoy approaching from the southwest. O'Kane positioned Tang for a night surface attack, but bright moonlight forced him to submerge and conduct a more cautious periscope approach. At midnight, Tang fired 4 torpedoes at 2 overlapping cargo ships, achieving 3 hits that sent both vessels to the bottom. Before escorts could respond, O'Kane withdrew to reload and reposition for a 2nd attack. What followed demonstrated O'Kane's tactical genius at its peak. Rather than retreat to open water as most commanders would, he kept Tang close to the convoy's probable route, predicting where the escorts would reform their defensive screen. 6 hours later, with the escort's alertness dulled by a long night of fruitless searching, Tang surfaced and raced ahead of the convoy's projected track. At dawn, O'Kane executed a submerged attack from ahead, firing DE on the convoy's throat as ships passed directly over his position. The Japanese escorts never imagined a submarine would position itself directly in the convoy's path, and their sonar swept past Tang while she lay silent at periscope depth. O'Kane fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession, then went deep as explosions reverberated through the water. 3 more cargo ships went to the bottom, their cargoes of war materials settling into the depths. The patrol continued through late August with similar successes. On August 23rd, Tang sank 2 tankers carrying aviation fuel to Japanese air bases. On August 26th, she destroyed a transport packed with troops being redeployed to defend the Philippines. The crew worked in a state of controlled exhaustion, knowing that every day in the patrol area meant another chance to strike at the enemy. Naval records show that Tang's 4th patrol resulted in 13 confirmed sinkings, though post-war analysis of Japanese records suggested the actual number might have been higher. O'Kane brought Tang back to Pearl Harbor in early September 1944, having expended every torpedo aboard, his crew having witnessed the destruction of more than 30,000 tons of Japanese shipping. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, personally met Tang at the pier, shaking O'Kane's hand and telling assembled reporters that he had just witnessed the most successful submarine patrol in American naval history. But Tang's story was not yet finished. 1 more patrol remained, and it would be her last. September 27, 1944. Tang backed away from Pier 7 at Pearl Harbor's submarine base, her hull freshly painted, her engines overhauled, her torpedo rooms loaded with 24 Mark 18 electric torpedoes. The crew had enjoyed 24 days of rest, though men like O'Kane found it impossible to truly relax while the war continued. During the refit period, O'Kane had studied intelligence reports showing Japanese convoy routes shifting northward, closer to Formosa and the Philippines, as American forces prepared for the liberation of the Philippine Islands. General Douglas MacArthur's return to the Philippines would require cutting Japan's supply lines to its southern empire, and submarines like Tang would play a crucial role in isolating Japanese forces from reinforcement and resupply. The 5th Patrol's assigned area covered the waters between Formosa and the Japanese home islands, a relatively narrow corridor through which all maritime traffic to the Philippines had to pass. O'Kane's orders directed him to interdict Japanese reinforcement convoys heading south, giving priority to transports carrying troops and military equipment. The strategic situation had shifted dramatically since Tang's commissioning just 11 months earlier. American forces now controlled most of the Central Pacific, and the Japanese Empire found itself in a defensive crouch, desperately trying to hold its remaining territory. Every transport sunk meant fewer soldiers to oppose MacArthur's landing forces. Every tanker destroyed meant less fuel for Japanese aircraft defending the Philippines. Tang made the passage from Pearl Harbor to her patrol area at maximum cruising speed, covering over 4,000 miles in just 9 days. O'Kane kept the crew at drill stations throughout the transit, running practice approaches and simulated attacks until every man could perform his duties by muscle memory alone. On October 6th, Tang crossed the 180th meridian and entered the war zone, where lookouts strained their eyes scanning for aircraft and aeroscopes. The submarine operated on a tense routine, submerged during daylight hours, surfaced at night to charge batteries and search for targets. Radio broadcasts from Pearl Harbor brought news of American carrier strikes on Formosa and the Philippines, attacks that would drive Japanese shipping closer to Tang's patrol area. The first contact came on October 10th, when radar detected a southbound convoy 2 hours before midnight. O'Kane brought Tang to battle stations and began a high-speed surface pursuit, using darkness as concealment while he maneuvered into attack position. Through his binoculars, he counted 4 cargo ships and 3 escorts, including what appeared to be a destroyer. The convoy was making good speed, forcing Tang to run at maximum power to achieve a favorable firing position. For 2 hours, O'Kane played a deadly game of geometry, calculating courses and speeds while maintaining radar contact. At 0200 hours on October 11th, he achieved the perfect position, close enough for accurate torpedo shots, far enough to avoid visual detection. Tang's bow tube spat 4 torpedoes into the darkness, followed seconds later by 2 more from her stern tubes. The night erupted in explosions. as 3 cargo ships absorbed hits, their hulls rupturing in geysers of flame and debris. O'Kane ordered a crash dive as the destroyer's searchlights swept the water where Tang had been seconds before. In the control room, the crew listened to breaking up noises as the stricken ship settled into the deep, 3 more victims added to Tang's toll. According to correspondence held in the Naval History and Heritage Command archives, O'Kane later wrote to his wife that he felt no joy in the destruction, only a grim satisfaction that each sinking shortened the war and saved American lives. October 11th through October 23rd, 1944. Tang operated in the waters between Formosa and the Chinese coast, intercepting convoy after convoy, attempting to reinforce Japanese positions in the Philippines. O'Kane had never seen such target-rich hunting. Japanese commanders, desperate to move troops and supplies southward before American invasion USS landed, were throwing everything available into the transportation effort. Intelligence officers at Pacific Fleet headquarters later estimated that Japan committed nearly every available transport to this critical movement, knowing that failure to reinforce the Philippines would mean losing the empire's defensive perimeter. For Tang, it meant 2 weeks of nearly continuous combat operations that pushed the crew to the limits of endurance. On October 13th, Tang encountered a 10-ship convoy escorted by destroyers and patrol craft. O'Kane executed a daring daylight submerged attack, penetrating the escort screen to fire at point-blank range. 4 torpedoes struck 2 transports, sending both to the bottom along with an estimated 2,500 Japanese soldiers. The destroyers responded with a savage depth charge attack that drove Tang deep, straining her pressure hull as she crept away at slow U speed. For 3 hours, explosions walked back and forth above the submarine, while the crew maintained absolute silence, knowing that any noise could draw the hunters to their location. When Tang finally escaped and surfaced after dark, O'Kane found the hull had sprung minor leaks and several instruments had been knocked offline, but nothing that would prevent continued operations. October 17th brought Tang's most spectacular day of the war. At dawn, lookouts spotted a massive convoy, 14 ships in multiple columns, protected by 6 escorts. O'Kane spent the entire day shadowing this convoy, staying just beyond visual range while plotting his attack. Japanese commie. Manders had routed the convoy close to the Chinese coast, thinking shallow water would deter submarine attack. Instead, O'Kane used the shallow water to his advantage, positioning Tang in a spot where escorts couldn't effectively deploy depth charges without risking running aground. As darkness fell, Tang surfaced and drove straight into the convoy formation. Over the next 4 hours, O'Kane executed what naval historians would later call one of the most aggressive submarine attacks of the entire war. Tang twisted between the convoy columns, firing torpedoes from both ends, reloading and firing again. The scene resembled something from a nightmare for the Japanese convoy commander. Ships exploded and burned across miles of ocean, while the escorts frantically tried to locate the submarine that seemed to be everywhere at once. O'Kane's tactical reports, preserved in Navy archives, describe firing solutions computed at ranges so close that the crew could hear propeller beats through the hull without using sonar. Torpedo man Floyd Caverly and his crew loaded 2 Bess in complete darkness as the submarine heeled over in sharp turns, their hands working from memory alone. By the time Tang finally withdrew at midnight, 5 cargo ships and 1 tanker had gone to the bottom, with 2 more vessels heavily damaged. The crew had expended 16 torpedoes, nearly their entire load, in a single night of combat. Tang returned to her patrol area after a brief withdrawal to conduct battle damage assessment and emergency repairs. Chief Electrician Leibold discovered that constant depth charging had cracked battery cell casings, creating the danger of chlorine gas formation if seawater mixed with battery acid. Motor machinist De Silva found stress cracks in the diesel engine mounts, and main shaft bearings worn beyond normal tolerances. The submarine needed a shipyard, but O'Kane had 8 torpedoes remaining, and the patrol area continued to produce targets. On October 22nd, Tang sank a freighter carrying aviation fuel. On October 23rd, she destroyed 2 more cargo ships. The crew's exhaustion had reached dangerous levels. Men fell asleep at their stations, reaction times slowed, mistakes became more frequent. but everyone understood they were part of something historic. Tang's scorecard stood at 31 confirmed sinkings, with several more vessels probably destroyed. No submarine in American history had achieved such a record, and the crew knew they were writing the final chapter of an epic story. They had no way of knowing the chapter would end in tragedy just hours away. October 24th, 1944. The evening began with Tang stalking the most valuable target O'Kane had yet encountered. Intelligence reports had indicated a major reinforcement convoy would transit the area, and at 19:30 hours, radar confirmed multiple contacts to the north. As Tang closed on the convoy, the radar picture resolved into something extraordinary. 11 ships in tight formation, including what appeared to be several large transports, protected by at least 4 destroyer-type escorts. O'Kane recognized this as probably the last major convoy he would encounter before returning to Pearl Harbor. Tang had only 8 torpedoes remaining, barely enough for one major attack. The tactical situation presented serious challenges. The convoy was making high speed through well-lit waters, with a nearly full moon rising that would illuminate the sea surface and make traditional night surface attacks extremely dangerous. O'Kane made a decision that reflected his entire combat philosophy. Rather than take the safe approach, a single submerged attack followed by immediate withdrawal, he would attempt one final surface action, using Tang's speed and maneuverability to attack from multiple angles. He believed the convoy's high value justified the risk, and his crew had executed similar attacks successfully throughout their 9 months of combat. At 2000 hours, Tang surfaced miles ahead of the convoy and began her approach at full power. In the conning tower, O'Kane and his officers computed firing solutions while lookouts scanned for aircraft and patrol boats. The diesels roared at maximum power as Tang knifed through moderate seas, closing the range to the convoy at 22 knots. At 2200 hours, Tang reached her first firing position on the convoy's port flank, range 3,000 yards. O'Kane fired 3 torpedoes from the bow tubes at 2 overlapping transports, watching through his binoculars as the weapons tracked straight and true. 2 massive explosions lit the night as both torpedoes struck home, and the forward transport immediately began settling by the bow. Without waiting to observe results, O'Kane ordered a radical turn to port, bringing Tang's stern tubes to bear on a large tanker in the convoy's second column. 2 more torpedoes left the stern tubes, both hitting the tanker amidships. The resulting explosion suggested the tanker carried aviation fuel. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air, turning night into day across the entire convoy. The escort commanders finally reacted, ordering their destroyers to break formation and hunt for the submarine that had appeared in their midst. Tang's surface silhouette, low and dark against the black water, remained nearly invisible despite the flames. O'Kane ordered a high-speed run to the convoy's starboard side, intending to execute a second attack from a completely unexpected angle. For 30 minutes, Tang raced through the darkness at full power, circling the burning ships while the escort searched frantically on the wrong side of the convoy. At 2300 hours, Tang achieved her second firing position. O'Kane had 2 torpedoes remaining in the forward tubes and 1 in the stern. He decided to fire all 3 in rapid succession, targeting the largest remaining transport. This would leave Tang with no weapons, but O'Kane calculated that 3 hits would sink the transport and end the patrol on the highest possible note. Tang swung to present her bow to the target, steadied on course, and O'Kane gave the firing order. 2 torpedoes leaped from the forward tubes, followed immediately by the final weapon. The crew watched the torpedo wake streak toward the target through the moonlit water. October 24th, 1944, 2300 hours and 30 seconds. The final torpedo's wake appeared normal as it left Tang's number 3 tube, the electric weapon accelerating to 46 knots as its gyroscope steadied it on the correct bearing. Forward in the torpedo room, the crew secured the empty tube and prepared to close the outer door. In the conning tower, O'Kane tracked the weapon's progress through his binoculars, watching the faint phosphorescent wake arrow toward the transport. Seconds ticked by. 10, 15, 20. The torpedo should have been halfway to target. Then Quartermaster Sidney Jones, stationed as lookout on the bridge, shouted words that froze every man's blood. "The torpedo's broaching! It's turning!" O'Kane snapped his binoculars toward the errant weapon and witnessed every submarine commander's nightmare. The torpedo had surfaced and was curving in a wide circle, its steering mechanism malfunctioning catastrophically. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, despite years of development, still suffered from occasional gyroscope failures that sent weapons on circular runs. In this case, the torpedo's circle would bring it directly back toward Tang. O'Kane had perhaps 20 seconds to save his boat and crew. He shouted orders to the helmsman. "Right full rudder! All ahead emergency!" Tang's bow began to swing as the diesels screamed at maximum power, but the submarine's turning radius was far wider than the torpedo's curved track. Officers and lookouts on the bridge watched in helpless horror as their own weapon raced toward them through the moonlit water. The torpedo struck Tang at 23:35 hours, impacting on the stern between the after-torpedo room and the maneuvering room. The explosion ripped through the pressure hull, instantly killing everyone in the stern compartments. Seawater flooded into the aftersections with incredible force as the stern began to sink. On the bridge, O'Kane felt the submarine lurch beneath his feet. He grabbed the bridge railing as Tang's stern settled rapidly, tilting the entire boat at a steep angle. Below decks, men throughout the submarine scrambled for survival as emergency lights flickered on and watertight doors slammed shut. In the forward torpedo room, Chief Torpedo Man's mate Bill Ballinger ordered his men to dog the afterdoor as water began seeping around its seal. In the control room, Chief Electrician Leibold watched helplessly as the depth gauge unwound. 40 feet, 60 feet, 80 feet. Tang was sinking stern first with at least 30 men still aboard. O'Kane and 8 other men remained on the bridge as the submarine went under. Standard submarine procedure called for bridge personnel to enter the conning tower through the bridge hatch and secure it behind them. But Tang sank too fast for orderly evacuation. The sea swept over the bridge, pulling O'Kane and the others into the water as the submarine's bow pointed skyward and slid beneath the waves. Tang settled on the bottom in only 180 feet of water, her bow tilted upward at a 45-degree angle. Inside the forward compartments, survivors assessed their desperate situation. The aftersection was completely flooded, killing everyone stationed there instantly. The forward torpedo room and forward battery compartment retained their pressure integrity, trapping 30 men in a steel tomb on the seafloor. These men had one possible means of escape: Momsen lung escape devices, primitive rebreathers that theoretically allowed sailors to ascend from depths up to 300 feet. But the device had never been used successfully in combat conditions, and a 180-foot ascent presented enormous risks. The survivors organized themselves for escape attempts. Chief Ballinger took charge, dividing the men into groups that would exit through the forward torpedo room escape trunk. The procedure required flooding the small trunk with seawater until pressure equalized with the sea outside, then opening the hatch and swimming to the surface. Men faced multiple dangers: pressure changes that could burst lungs, nitrogen narcosis that caused confusion and panic, cold water that induced shock, and Japanese patrol boats that would capture or kill any survivors reaching the surface. Through the long night, groups of men entered the escape trunk and attempted the ascent. Some panicked during the flooding sequence and died in the trunk. Others made it outside the submarine, but lost consciousness during the ascent and drowned. A few reached the surface, only to be captured immediately by Japanese patrol boats that had gathered over the sunken submarine. Of the 30 men trapped inside Tang, only 5 successfully completed the escape. Chief Ballinger, motor machinist's mate; Floyd Caverly, motor machinist's mate Hayes Trucca, electrician's mate William Leibold, and fireman Clayton Decker. On the surface, O'Kane and several other men from the bridge had survived the initial sinking. They swam through water covered with oil and debris from the convoy's burning ships, trying to stay together in the darkness. Japanese patrol boats systematically searched the area, picking up survivors, both Japanese sailors from the sunken ships and American submariners from Tang. A patrol boat crew pulled O'Kane from the water just before dawn on October 25th. The commander, who had sunk more ships than any other American submarine captain, was now a prisoner of war, watching the morning sun rise over water that held the wreck of his boat and the bodies of 78 of his men. 9 men total serve. Ived Tang's sinking. O'Kane, 4 men from the bridge, and the 5 who escaped from inside the submarine. All 9 would spend the remainder of the war in Japanese prison camps, enduring brutal conditions and interrogations. The Japanese never believed O'Kane's account of Tang's record. His claims of 33 ships sunk in 9 months seemed like the fantasies of a defeated enemy trying to inflate his importance. The historical record proved O'Kane correct. Post-war analysis of Japanese shipping records confirmed that USS Tang sank 24 ships during her 5 war patrols, totaling 93,000 tons, the highest confirmed total for any American submarine. Additional ships probably sunk but not confirmed brought O'Kane's likely total to 33 vessels. He was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1946 for Tang's final patrol and 3 Navy Crosses for earlier actions. The 78 men who died with Tang received recognition as heroes who had participated in one of the most successful submarine campaigns in naval history. Commander Richard O'Kane retired from the Navy as a Rear Admiral in 1957 and died in February 1994 at age 83. Tang's wreck remains on the bottom where she sank, an official war grave holding the remains of men who achieved a combat record that will likely never be surpassed. The submarine's extraordinary success represented not just the skill of one commander, but the courage and competence of 87 men who became the deadliest submarine crew in American naval history.